Good afternoon. We will begin our policy committee meeting, and we are scheduled to begin with the comment on temporary employment.
Excuse me. Good afternoon. I'm Jerome Jones, Director of Labor Relations, and here to present the policy on temporary employment. Okay, so the temporary employment policy, the purpose is to convert the old board rule to a policy with accompanying regulations. We'll go through some of the terms and definitions and the district's responsibilities. In looking at this policy, we did look at some of the other LEAs in the area, and all of them, let's say PG, Howard, Baltimore County, and Montgomery County have temporary employment policies. Harford County does not.
Mr. Jones, what about Anne Arundel County?
I didn't look at, I don't know why, I didn't look at Anne Arundel County, but we can look and see what they have. Make a note.
I do have a quick question. Is it a reason, just quickly, what was the reason for just these?
We were looking at some counties that were similar in size to us. Yeah, some counties within Maryland specifically that were similar in size.
Okay, thank
you. So definitions, temporary employment, it is to meet short-term operational and instructional needs. They do not work in a position with city schools lasting longer than 90 workdays or 180 calendar days unless it is extended. So each request for a temporary employee from the time we enter it is for a maximum of 180 calendar days or 90 work days. At the end of that period, the assignment is ended while schools can or offices can request an extension. They must go back through the process to request an extension. And that's the way we ensure that there's a regular review of all the temporary employment in the district.
Does that extension have to be made prior to the 90-day period?
It has to be made prior to the end of the 90-day period, 2 weeks prior to the end of the temporary employment term. The school will get a notification that term is ending, and they have to either notify the employee that their employment will end and or request an extension of the employment. They are paid on a biweekly basis and only for hours worked, and they serve as at-will employees whose relationship can be terminated at any time. Our temporary employees do have access to our EAP policy program, and also we must cover them under workers' compensation. We are looking at, under the Affordable Care Act, there may be some implications depending on how much you make and how long you work. There is some potential legislation in Maryland that may be looking at substitutes being covered under affordable care, and so we have to take a look at that to see if there are implications there. They're compensated based on the type of work that they do into basically an hourly rate, and they can apply for consideration for employment in regular positions if they are employed in one of our regular positions. Their time as a temporary does not count towards their seniority with the district. When you look at the board rule, this policy now recommends that it does specify the definition of 90 workdays as employment in a temporary position. In the old board rules, it just said 90 days. We were very specific, talk about workdays here. And it specifies the hiring authority and the onboarding process. So in the onboarding, all employees must clear our pre-employment process with the fingerprinting, the background. We implement the pre-employment, including a criminal background check. We assign official start dates. The request manager must submit the documents regarding candidates' qualifications to their supervisor or department chief, and temporary employment request forms are submitted in our P-STAR system. So they must go through that process. So there are certain pieces of the responsibility for the employment of temporary employment. Office of Human Capital, we have the authority to review and audit pay rates for temporary employees. We review all applications to verify compliance with the policy, completeness of data, and appropriate approval and signatures. And the Chief Human Capital Officer must approve any request to extend temporary employment beyond 2 90-day periods. Another thing that Human Capital also does, as part of the temporary employment policy, every year, all temporary employment is ended as of June 30th. So at the end of the fiscal year, we terminate all temporary employment, and if someone wants to bring them over into the next fiscal year, they must submit a new P-STAR. So that ensures that we are looking at all of these and capture them, and that costs do not run from one fiscal year to another. So by ending on June 30th, when they submit the new P-STAR, we can ensure that there's budgeted money to support that position for the next fiscal year. Under this, the hiring managers have to submit the request for temporary employment. It includes the appropriate budget string, beginning and end dates of the position, the duties to be performed, and the expected hours per week. They're not allowed to permit temporary workers to begin working before Human Capital officially clears the employee. Not allowed to permanently replace regular employees or those on layoff status with temporary workers, and must request approval by Human Capital to extend temporary work employments for more than a 90-day period. One of the other things in the temporary employment policy is specifically delineates that we cannot use temporary employees to provide direct instruction in the classroom. They can be used as tutors. They can be used to augment, if there's special skills, to augment the direct instruction, but they cannot be used to provide direct instruction. Therefore, they cannot issue grades for city school students. Questions, comments?
Questions?
No, I don't know.
I'm trying to find who is defined as a temporary employee. So that could be a substitute teacher. I'm just trying to find it on our website in the Human Capital tab. So we have like substitute teachers, or when would hypothetically, when would we be hiring a temporary employee for like a temporary vacancy? Or like maybe maternity leave or
Okay.
I don't know.
So there are two things. So we really ought to separate substitute teachers from temporary employment,
employees.
because substitute teachers is an entirely different system. While they are temporary employees, when you look at will employment, we have a roster of people who have come in and applied to be substitutes. They go through the pre-employment, and they're on a roster that principals have access to call in and come in to substitute. So that is totally separate. While that is temporary employment, it doesn't really fall under the temporary employment policy. As far as who would initiate the request to, if a school has a specific situation where they may need some help on a short-term basis, a school or an office, they would initiate the request to hire a person to fill that need, and also submit the names of candidates that they want to fill that need. So the department in need submits.
So again, a long-term substitute teacher is not considered to be a temporary employee.
No, it's not.
Okay.
It's considered a substitute teacher.
Okay.
Yeah, so we look at those two totally different.
So a hiring manager, if they have the budget for a temporary employee, and they have a need, they make the request to the Office of Human Capital, who then decides whether or not that potential hire would be appropriate?
So they would make the request in the P-STAR system. The principal would make the request. It would then go to their ILED to approve that request prior to coming to the Office of Human Capital. So the principal supervisor looks at the request and either approves or denies the request before it comes to Human Capital.
And that's even for the renewal, the extension?
Correct.
Okay.
I just have one more recommendation, if possible. Is it possible, to prevent in the future, you might, a board member or someone would ask the question, could you make a list, an extensive list of people who are, individuals who would be considered temporary and who would be considered non-temporary, even though they're not considered full-time? And then you at will. What is the difference between at will? At will employee, in my world, how ed would be, someone would be like a vice president or dean or something, who's at will, who can be released for whatever, at the discretion of the president or something like that. I don't know the difference between at will, temporary, and full-time. Is that three different things going on right there? Who would be an at will person?
Sure. Here, the reference to being at will is similar to what you're describing.
Oh,
It's
okay.
simply saying that there's no employment obligation made to the employee by hiring them as a temporary employee. So it means next week, the hiring manager could determine that there's no longer a need for that temporary employee, and then the employment would end.
Thank you very much. Wait, we do have one.
That we mentioned the workers' comp for those temporary, you said there were a few more things that we needed to check out. So I just wanted to.
Yeah, as far as healthcare and the reporting, our requirements to cover them, potentially under the Affordable Care Act, if there are implications there, we are looking at that.
Thank you, Mr. Jones, very much. We will now move on to talk about, where am I? You're here. So, heroin and opioid addiction. Ms. Fink, hi. Welcome. Hope not.
Good afternoon. This is a policy, it's IHAMA, which Heroin and Opiate Addiction Education.
Ms. Fink, can you speak a little louder or hold it closer?
Yeah.
Thank you.
Heroin and Opioid Addiction Education. This policy is a policy that was mandated by COMAR. It's not because we have a heroin and opioid policy. I wanted to make that clear. We do not because we have a heroin and opioid problem in the school. Unfortunately, most of the students who have that kind of problem aren't coming to school. So they require us to establish a policy requiring each school to store naloxone and authorized school personnel to administer it, and develop an educational program, which is part of our school health curriculum. So this policy, it codifies the current naloxone management policy established in the Baltimore City Health Department, because the Baltimore City Health Department is our lead in terms of providing health services in city schools. We have a partnership between city schools and BCHD, which provides all of our health services, and the definitions are consistent with the BCHD standing orders. So we did not develop something that was new and different. We developed something that integrated what they were doing already.
Just to clarify for the public, BCHD, Baltimore City
City
Health Department.
Right.
Thank you.
City schools, in cooperation with BCHD, is going to develop a plan for educating students in the future and staff on the signs and symptoms of opioid overdose and the availability of the fact that we have naloxone in all of our schools and available in all of our schools. It is supplied by the health department. It's not a Baltimore City Schools purchase. All school-based professionals will be, all school-based health professionals, which are usually employees of the Baltimore City Health Department, will be trained and certified in the administration of naloxone, both as an injection or intramuscular, however it needs to be done at any given time. They will be trained, and all school-based health centers will have at least one person who is trained and can recognize the signs and symptoms. So we look at the common signs and symptoms, and we look at the standing order for this.
And for clarification, when it says school-based health suites and health centers, that means all of our schools, in short. Then make sure that we cover every type of service that we provide in a district.
I just have one quick question. We have a healthcare person at every school.
Yes.
At every school. And suppose that healthcare person is missing or out or something happens, what happens then? There's not a second stand-in person that could administer?
There is going to be some training for a second standard person, which
Okay.
we don't have as yet. However, the Baltimore City Health Department makes every effort to make sure that if somebody is going to be out, there will be a substitute there. And if it's an unannounced absence and they call to the health department, they will send one of the nursing supervisors over.
Okay.
We
Thank
try
you.
not to leave the health suites uncovered.
Oh, right, okay, thank you.
The city school CEO designee will collaborate with the Baltimore City Health Department to develop and implement programming for community relations and education functions. And the person needs to coordinate the school-based community forums and coordinate with local law enforcement, because that's all part of the same thing there. And one of the things we have said is that we are not going to be calling the police in case a student overdoses. That's not one of the things that's going to happen. We're going to give them their medicine.
Could you please repeat what you just said?
I said, we're not going to be calling police to arrest someone who overdoses. We're going to give them their treatment. And the people involved in this are senior leadership, the Baltimore City Health Department, City Schools Police, City Schools Wellness Council, the Parent and Advisory Board, the Senior Special Education Citizens Advisory, the Maryland Alliance of Public Charter Schools, and external stakeholders and everybody in there. And again, when we go back to this is a policy that is really developed in response to a requirement in COMAR. So that's why we developed it. And thank you, Jane, for making it so clear.
Okay, I do have a question in the beginning, off the record, before I think we turned the microphone on. You did just in passing, sorry, in the very beginning, in passing, you did mention that, I think you were just saying that we don't have that many incidents in Baltimore City. Have we administered a study to determine, and looked at all the schools to see how many incidents have actually occurred, or what percentage? When you do the percentage, it's always to see the numbers.
It's been, we have not done a study, but we have used 0 doses.
And we've had this dose since 2015. So we're working with the health department and determining what that outreach plan will look like based off of the populations that our schools serve. So we're educating and targeting areas where we have a problem in the district, and also supporting those families and our students.
Okay, but what I was asking, you said, you have not,
Naloxone, right. We have not used,
I was asking, have we had an incident that it would have been necessary to administer? Do you know that?
not that we are aware of. Because we have had the dosages in the school system since 2015.
Okay, I'm
And the school,
saying,
the health department reports if they have used this or had an incident where it was required.
okay, but what I'm saying is I got that part, but we've had, and it's hard for me to believe that we haven't had an incident where it was needed and we didn't have it. And one of the reasons why we do now is to make sure that we're prepared for it. Again, we've had incidents when they've taken people out in ambulances, and some survived, some didn't because of it not having it there. I was just wondering if we have done a study on incidents before we got to the point of using it. We don't know that yet.
No, we have not done a study,
Okay.
but to my knowledge, we have never removed a student in an ambulance because of an overdose. When we remove students in ambulances, it's been through an emergency petition or behavior or them being ill, but not because of an overdose in school.
Okay.
And we do take several students out every year in ambulances when
Right.
there is
But
an
not due to-
emergency.
Not due to overdose?
No.
Okay, thank you.
No, I just have an idea, though. I know that you all are still working with the health department and our folks. On slide 6, where it says engagement, these are folks that have already been engaged in this process?
So we're meeting with school police shortly in the end of the week to discuss what that outreach looks like, because we have to do outreach with school police officers. And then also the health department's in transition for their opioid person, who's going to be the lead. So we're going to work with them on an outreach plan before the school year begins, so we can target areas in the district to have this outreach go out, because it's more effective if we're targeting schools in areas where we desperately need that support. To give you an idea, right now, we're dealing with fentanyl, and the health department sees our dosage really as a backup dosage, because in instances when an officer may administer fentanyl, they may actually be taken under the effects of it, so that dosage may be able to save their life or someone else's life outside of the building.
So this technically is just us being proactive, but also aligning ourselves with the law.
Correct.
Yes.
An idea could, it's just an idea, to do like like an online training for folks with this, since I won't call it a minor issue, but no one has reported the use of the overdoses yet, right? So we've had the Noxalone in school since 2015, but no one, in the event that it has to be used, the health suite from the respective location within our district has to report that information to the health department. And that hasn't been done yet, right?
No,
No.
the health department, if they use it the same way that we talked about when we talked about the EpiPens, they must report anytime they use it, because number one, they have to report it, and number two, it has to be
That's
replaced.
what I'm saying, but no one has reported that yet.
No.
No.
Right, so this is just being proactive. The idea would be, because there are so many trainings, like we were thinking earlier about the drills and all of the laws that change and require schools and folks to do, like, just could be an idea to do this online, like maybe some online training for
So-
school-based staff, if you
Possible.
didn't already have that in the
Yeah.
works.
We are going to be asking the health department to train school-based staff. In addition, because we want people to recognize the symptoms and occurrences, we are also including it, as required, in the health curriculum. So that for the students, this will be required in the health curriculum, so they can recognize some of the symptoms of opioid overdose in case something happens.
Thanks.
And maybe convince them that they don't want to do it.
I'm guessing, I may be wrong, but would that be high school age students that would be
It would
getting?
be middle school and high
Middle
school age
school and high
students.
Because those
right.
will count in our health classes.
Yeah.
Thank you. Any more questions?
I'm good.
Thank you very
Thank
much. Very helpful. Thank you. And I believe we have at least one person signed up for questions. Kimberly Mooney.
Good afternoon.
Hi.
a bunch of questions, so I don't know if it's better for me to read them all and then people can respond, or one at a time. I know I only have 3 minutes.
How many is a bunch? Do you have a list?
You know me, right? I submitted it ahead of time. Did you receive it?
We did not submit to staff, so I think you got an answer.
On part of it. Okay, so I'm just gonna go, and if you wanna stop me, stop me.
Okay.
So on the policy for temporary employees, thank you for putting it in place. It's really important because we know we do have temporary employees, and it's very concerning that they may or may not have gone through criminal background checks and all of these things to make sure that kids are safe in the presence of these folks. So some of my questions about it are, what about temps that have already been onboarded? How will we make sure that this procedure is applied to them as well once it's adopted? How will it be applied in charter schools? Because we know a lot of times they do things that might not be permissible in the rest of our public schools. What evidence will need to be shown that a principal has tried to fill the position within a permanent employee? And then within that policy, GBM .3.j, it's very vague. And it would still allow unionized workers to be displaced if there are no standards for proving that certified unionized workers were not sought to fill the positions before they're given to temporary workers. So if we're going to say you can have temps and you should exhaust all avenues to fill those positions with full-time employees before you get a temp, where are the teeth in that? Like how are we demonstrating that that's being done, and who's going to be accountable for proving that they have sought and, posted the position opening and so on and so forth? And how, if at all, does this relate to non-certified teachers? So sometimes non-certified individuals are hired not as temps, but as full-time employees on conditional certificates. And I'm just wondering how long that someone can continuously get conditional certificates. And just to mention, a lot of teachers are still having trouble with the certification office, getting answers about whether particular classes will be valid for renewing their certificate. So that would be important to address if we want to keep certified full-time people in the classroom, getting that addressed. So that was all the things that I want to say on the temp one. Joe Strakes responded to something
Ms.
else.
Mooney,
Yeah.
can we maybe halt for just a
Yeah.
minute and talk about some of those before we go on?
Yeah.
Does that make some sense?
Yes.
So, charters, I don't know if I have an answer. I would think they have to comply with all of our policies.
Yes, Ms. Mooney, to your first two questions, so Mr. Jones shared that this is actually a conversion of a board rule.
Right.
So many components of this new policy actually were already in place in the board rule. So to the question about whether temps who have already been employees here, whether this applies to them, the provisions of things like background checks and having to have the hiring manager submit a request that is reviewed by their manager and then the Office of Human Capital, those things were already in place. And the board rule did, and the board policy will apply to traditional schools and charter schools.
Well, so that almost concerns me more because I know there are people that have been temps year after year after year. So part of the thing that I'm concerned about is that if they have 90 days, which they can extend a second period, that's the entire school year, 180, and then they can apply to do it again for the next school year. That's always, like, they can continuously apply to be a temp. So it still seems like we're having a wide open door for someone to continuously fill a position that could be a full-time position without posting. Like, for example, you were asking what kind of folks can be temps. There are people filling like dean of school positions at some schools that are technically temps right now, and they have been deans for years. So I find it hard to believe that those jobs were listed and posted and that no teacher, educator, assistant principal, et cetera, wanted to apply for those, and that we had to go find a temp to do it.
So I don't know if it would be worth our following up this with some research on, because I can't answer that, but we could look back, we could look into it possibly. How many temps do we have? How, I don't know how hard that would be to do, but is that a reasonable thing to go for?
Yeah, I think hearing what your concern is, we certainly can bring back some more information that we didn't prepare for today to be responsive to that concern.
Make a comment. Listening to some of your questions, which was very interesting, and I don't know if any of the board members can answer those questions because of the detail and content of the question. It would seem like the Office of Human Capital would have to go back and pull up the documents. And I don't know if Commissioner Berkeley wants to do this, but it seems when I was trying to write down all the questions you had, it's so many, and it's interesting. I would like to understand it. It would seem to me that you could put it in writing and,
Yes.
And submit it to Mr. Gant over here.
I did.
When we collect that information.
Yep,
Oh,
it's
you
in
did it
there.
already. When you collect that information, I think it's good for us to know some of the answers as well. Good questions, but I don't know if the board members have the answers to those kind of detailed questions that you get.
So it's staff has the answers, I mean, staff has the answers, they do have the answers. They have the questions too, so they started answering them, so I'll make sure the rest.
Oh, so we've had those questions
He
already?
sent it to staff.
Oh,
So
okay.
They partially answered it, I think they were.
Oh, good.
researching the rest of it, so.
Oh, good. And
They
he
should
would,
get answered the rest of your questions.
and he's very good about making sure when they complete it, he will email the answers to us.
Okay.
And then I guess after that, it goes back to whoever, and you would get your answers.
That would be great.
Mr.
The only
Skinner,
one
did
I
you wanna
thought
say
of while I was sitting here was the one about if it's 180 days and then you can apply the next year. That seems like
Well, that's
it's perpetual.
That's the beauty of having an audience and public opinion or public community participation, because even when we're up here listening to the presentation, and there's people who are inside of the incident, whatever's going on, you know things or ask questions, and it's good for us as well.
Right.
We appreciate your participation and helping us.
No problem. I'll email and just add that question.
Good, that'd be
Yeah.
great.
Sure.
Do you want to say something?
Yes, if I could, knowing that we'll provide written responses to, one thing that I do want to publicly respond to is the question about non-certified teachers, or the
Yes.
difference between a temporary employee and a teacher who may be working with a conditional certificate. So one of the options for certifying a teacher is to provide a conditional certificate. And when someone is hired in that capacity, they're hired as a teacher, just as any other teacher. And that is different and separate from a temporary employee. And in fact, someone should not be hired in the district as a temporary employee to perform the functions of a full-time teacher. And I emphasize that because we have had some incidents in the past where schools have attempted to do that, and we've had to take action to respond to that. So a temporary employee should never be acting in place of a full-time teacher.
And I think that's what didn't you address that already? You just said, I think that's one of the things that was in the document, that just. what
Yes,
you
in the
just said.
policy, it specifically states that a temporary employee cannot deliver direct instruction.
Right, mhm. Thank you.
So can I go on to the questions that were unrelated to that? It's very brief this time, I promise. So I know Joe Strake sent me a tentative timeline for JBB to come back onto the calendar. And that was underneath of JBB. We had had a discussion about adding a transgender student policy protection policy. And I'm just honestly like a little concerned that it's not even put back on the calendar until January 15th, 2019. So I would just encourage you, based on like the difficulties that students face in the classroom, like not to delay it that long. Originally, I think we had talked about possibly having it back on the calendar by October if we could, and I would really hope that we could try to just move it up a little bit. And also just if we could have more details about, so I know that the concern was that the person that used to be in the EEO office that was there for the meetings is no longer with the district. If we could track down the notes from those meetings, I would hope that like those still exist somewhere, so that we don't have to start from scratch again. So if it's possible to find those notes and share it with PCAB and with anyone who participated in those meetings so that we don't have to start all over again, I think that will be really helpful, if that's at all possible.
And which meetings? I'm sorry, just give me.
So the EEO office had public meetings with PCAB and with, just community input to get input on JBB specifically about, transgender student policy and non-discrimination, right. So I'm just hoping that since that person left, that those notes didn't also disappear.
Right, I hear you. That's reasonable. Thank you.
Sure. And I just wanted to point out, since we're talking about that LGBTQ plus teachers and staff have very little in the way of explicit protections. So while we're looking at the student end, it might be nice to actually put it in writing to protect staff members from being fired if they are openly LGBTQ.
Mr. Jones, do we have something like that already, like a statement that addresses that?
Yes, there are policies that prohibit discrimination based on sex, gender, sexual orientation already in the district. I can't off the top of my head quote what that policy is, but there exists currently policies regarding staff. I can't speak to students though.
Could somebody find out where that policy is, just so that I can pass it on to the teachers that it would apply to, so they know that they do have protections?
That was in your original question, so
Okay.
they'll respond to that as well.
Okay. And my very last question.
Policy ADA. Or
What is it?
ACA, sorry,
ACA
not ADA.
policy.
ACA, okay. And my very last question was about the heroin and opioid one. There was a slide that said something about the officer that would be in charge of it. And then under that, it said they would be responsible for coordinating with the Baltimore City Police Department. And I appreciated when they said that we're not going to call the police on someone who's just overdosed. We're going to give them the medication. But what would the role then be if they're coordinating with the Baltimore City Police Department, if not to call them when someone overdoses?
So when we coordinate with the Baltimore City Police Department is to provide outreach. One of the things that our officers will be trained in actually use of naloxone, and they also discuss the harmful effects. So it's more of like, I compare it to when they had the program in the 90s, Don't Do Drugs or whatever. I forgot the name of the
DARE?
program. DARE. It's similar to like a DARE model. So it's partially community policing in a way that you're introducing people to provide that safe space, but also provide information. So I think that was from looking at the information from the original legislation, that was the actual intent of that, not just to be law enforcement purposes.
Okay. I would just hope that in developing that we would look at efficacy, because I know as much as we all remember the DARE program, at least I do, when I was a kid, it hasn't been shown to have been particularly effective. And so as we develop a model for what an effective program would look like, it would be probably good to look back at what did and didn't work with that program so that this one can be more effective.
Thank you. Thank you both. Thank you very much. And Mr. Gant, do we have any other, did anyone else sign up? That was it, okay. Then in record time. Is there anyone with a question who is sitting here now who would like to ask a question? Okay?
I have a quick question. Is there, sure. Thank you, Commissioner. Is there a reason why ACA and JBA are in, so everything that specifically speaks to students is in J? And because I would think if we have a non-discrimination policy in foundations and basic commitment for employees, and this is a technical question, should the non-discrimination for students also be in A, or is there a reason why we've moved it to J?
Many of the policies are grouped according to the office that either drafted the policy or are responsible for implementations of the policies or regs. So you sometimes see what you just pointed out is that there are policies in different areas that seem to connect, but they're in very different places within the policy. So I think that the naming of them came about as a result of what department or organization was responsible for either drafting or the implementation of the policies.
My last question was just, it's really helpful for the regular board meetings when there are minutes after, and I know that it's not the same thing for policy committee meetings. It will be really helpful, I think, for people that can't be here if we also posted not just the agenda, but also minutes afterward, because the content of what we talk about is a lot more detailed than just what's in the agenda. So that would be really nice if we could also do that for policy committee.
It's a good thought. We'll look into that. Thank you. Any other questions or comments? Well, I hope that everyone is able to find their way wherever they're going next and stay dry. Thank you all for being here. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Excuse me. The policy committee meeting is now closed. Thank you.
And we'll convene again in August.
And the next meeting will be August the 21st. Thank you all for your help.